The Dyatlov Pass Incident. It's a name that is, well, synonymous with baffling tragedy and just terrifying unknowns. In February 1959, you have 9 experienced Soviet hikers. They set up camp high on Kalatchakal, or Dead Mountain, in the Urals. And then sometime in the dead of night, they cut their way out of their tent from the inside and flee into a -30-degree blizzard. So our mission today is a deep dive. We're going to pull apart the actual forensic records of the case. We're going to trace the investigation, focusing on the stunning, almost unbelievable contrast between the initial findings and what came later.
That contrast is the absolute heart of the mystery, isn't it? The investigation really unfolded in 2 completely different phases. The initial search, that was February and March of '59, it located 5 bodies. They were near a cedar tree, some scattered on the slope back toward the tent. And based on their location, their condition, the early conclusion was pretty simple. Tragic exposure, freezing to death.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because even those first 5 bodies, the ones that supposedly just died from the cold, had details that, I mean, reading the official autopsies, they should have immediately raised some serious red flags.
Oh, absolutely.
This wasn't just a group that got cold and, lay down to die.
You're exactly right. Let's start with the 2 bodies they found closest to that huge cedar tree. That was Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko. They were only lightly dressed.
In their underwear, right.
Some of them, yes. Underwear or just single layers. And they were right next to the remnants of a small fire they'd clearly tried to build, which, suggests they were awake and fighting.
And the details of that struggle are just horrific.
They are. Krivonischenko, for instance, had 3rd-degree burns on his foot and leg, but more bizarrely, the forensic record notes a piece of epidermis, the outer skin layer, from his own hand was found in his mouth.
From his own hand?
Yes. The medical examiner suggested he might have been biting himself to stay awake, or maybe to stifle a cry. And with Doroshenko, the picture gets even more complicated. Hypothermia was the cause of death, sure, but he also had a pulmonary contusion and edema.
So bruising and fluid in the lungs.
Exactly. And even stranger, the livor mortis, the blood pooling after death, showed his body had been moved. It wasn't in the position where he actually died.
So right there, by the fire, where they logically went for survival, you have extreme suffering, weird trauma, and a body that's been manipulated.
Right. Not a simple freezing death.
Not at all.
Then you move uphill from there, back toward the tent. That's where they found the other 3 from that first group. Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. They were kind of staggered at different distances, suggesting they were trying to get back to the tent for supplies or something warmer.
But even with these 3 who officially died of exposure on that desperate walk back, the evidence of some kind of external force shows up again.
Yes. Take Zenaida Kolmogorova. The records note this massive bright red bruise on her lumbar region. It was 29 by 6 centimeters.
That's huge. That's nearly a foot long.
A foot long, yeah. The forensic team described it as looking like it came from a blunt cylindrical object, like a baton. It's just a shocking thing to find on someone who supposedly just froze. And Rustam Slobodin had a definite head injury, a fracture of the frontal bone about 6 centimeters long.
So not trivial.
Not at all. And while the autopsy blamed hypothermia for his death, the pathologist really struggled to justify that particular fracture, a blunt force fracture, as being from a simple fall in the snow.
It almost sounds like the pathologist was, gently pushing back, suggesting these injuries, this baton-like bruise and the skull fracture, they required force that didn't fit the story.
Precisely. But because the group had fled the tent, and the cold was obviously the main factor, the official conclusion for all 5 settled on hypothermia. They focus on the rational things, like the survivors taking clothes off the dead to use themselves. It made the whole thing seem like a tragic but, understandable accident.
But that tidy, rational narrative was about to completely shatter. And here's where it gets really interesting. The whole case, the whole perception of it, it just flips on its head months later, in May. The snow melts, and what they find next turns this from a tragedy into a genuine, terrifying mystery.
In early May, yes. Under 4, maybe 4.5 meters of snow, they found them in a ravine about 75 meters from that cedar tree. They found the last 4 hikers: Ludmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Alexander Kolovatov.
And this wasn't just a pile of bodies, right? They were in some kind of shelter.
It was an organized shelter. They called it a den. They had cut down pine and cedar branches and laid them down for bedding. It proves, absolutely proves, that these survivors were rational.
They were thinking clearly.
Clearly enough to execute a survival strategy. using tools, building protection. They were not in a panic.
And the clothing confirmed that too, right? Their rational efforts.
Yes, Dubinina, for example. She was wearing Krivonischenko's sweater and his pants, which had been cut from his body back near the cedar. It just reinforces that they were, as you said, sane enough to do anything to survive.
So no paradoxical undressing or panic-induced psychosis?
None of that. They were clear-headed, resourceful.
Okay, but if they were so rational, so organized, why did they die there, buried under all that snow? This is the crucial part, the catastrophic trauma phase. Let's just catalog what was found on those bodies, because these injuries, they defy any logical explanation.
The three with the worst injuries were Zolotaryov, Dubinina, and Thibaut Brignol, and the pattern is just chilling. They were internally crushed by some immense force, but their external bodies were largely intact.
So let's start with Nikolai Thibaut Brignol. What did they find?
He suffered a horrific head injury. We're talking an extensive multi-splintered fracture to his temporal bone that extended into the frontal and sphenoid bones. It was a depressed fracture.
Pushed inward.
Pushed inward, exactly, suggesting massive, direct force. And crucially, there were no open wounds. No external signs of impact on the skin or tissue around his head.
That's terrifying. A devastating internal injury with no corresponding external damage. It's like something just squeezed his skull.
It's that same pattern with Semyon Zolotaryov. He was found with a completely crushed chest. Medically, it's called a flail chest. His ribs, numbers 2 through 6 on the right side, were all broken, each one with 2 separate fracture lines.
2 fracture lines on multiple ribs. That implies the entire rib cage was just compressed beyond its breaking point.
Exactly. And then we have Lyudmila Dubinina. Her injuries were perhaps the most shocking to the forensic team. She had massive symmetrical bilateral rib fractures.
Symmetrical on both sides.
On both sides. Ribs 2 through 5 on the right and 2 through 7 on the left. All of them complex, double-line fractures, just like Zolotaryov. This crushing caused a massive hemorrhage in her heart and severe internal bleeding.
To get injuries like that, symmetrical fractures on both sides, a person usually has to be pinned or squeezed, or hit with some kind of widespread, non-localized impact.
Correct. And again, the lack of external bruising means the force passed through the soft tissue and just pulverized the skeleton underneath. But the detail that has haunted this case for decades involves her face.
The missing soft tissue.
Her tongue, the hypoglossal muscle, and the muscles on the floor of her mouth were all gone. The record just starkly says, the tongue is missing.
And she might have been alive when this happened.
The autopsy estimated she died 10 to 20 minutes after the trauma, which implies she may well have been conscious, trying to breathe or speak. It's a detail that moves this away from anything natural, like an avalanche, into something just horrifyingly violent.
Did the files ever conclude how that happened? The tongue?
No. No definitive conclusion. People have proposed scavenging by animals or water damage after the snowmelt, but given the crushing trauma she suffered at the same time, it remains this gruesome puzzle.
And the last one, Alexander Kolovatov, he was found with Zolotaryov.
Yes, embraced with him. He had injuries too, a wound behind his ear, a deformed neck, but his official cause of death was listed as hypothermia.
Which feels convenient.
It feels like an attempt to simplify a situation that was anything but simple, right? Many researchers just categorize his death as undetermined.
So what does this all mean? We have 5 people who froze but showed signs of struggle and weird trauma, and then 4 others who were crushed internally by some invisible force while they were rationally trying to survive in a shelter.
The full weight of this really comes from the man who did the autopsies, the regional forensic pathologist Boris Vozrozdeny. His testimony in May of '59 is the absolute key to understanding the scale of this.
And he didn't mince words. He used comparisons that must have just shocked the investigators.
He was explicit. When he was describing the skull fracture on Thibaut Brignol, Vozrozdeny stated in his testimony that it could not have been from a simple fall. He likened the force required to the impact of an automobile moving at high speed.
A car crash. A car crash force delivered to one man's skull in a remote mountain pass. It's impossible.
And then he turned to the crushed chests of Dubinina and Zolotaryov, those multiple bilateral fractures with no external damage. He connected that specific type of non-penetrating trauma to the injury you'd get from the shockwave of a bomb.
Wow, a bomb's shockwave. I mean, for a Soviet pathologist in 1959 to use that language, comparing injuries not to a bear or an ice fall, but to a bomb and a car crash, That just fundamentally breaks the whole hypothermia story.
It absolutely does. The evidence demanded a massive, non-penetrating compressive force of unbelievable magnitude.
And that evidence is exactly why the investigator, Ivanov, when he finally closed the case, couldn't just write it off as exposure. He had to account for what Vozdresdeny found.
Right. And the final official ruling, the one given to the families, it closed the case by stating the hikers died due to an overwhelming force which the hikers were unable to overcome.
An overwhelming force. That's the official admission that something huge and unknown crushed 4 of them. So we're left with this chilling paradox. The first 5 hikers die mostly of cold, but with signs of blunt trauma that were kind of, overlooked.
Yeah.
And the last 4 are crushed with internal trauma that requires high-speed mechanical or explosive force.
And if all that wasn't enough, there's another layer. The case files note that some of the clothes, particularly from Zolotaryov and Dubinina, later tested positive for significant radioactive contamination, alpha particles. It just adds to the unsettling environment around whatever that overwhelming force was.
The meticulous records of crushed ribs and shattered skulls, combined with the pathologist's shocking comparisons, they paint this terrifying picture. But for all of that detail, for all of that gruesome forensic work, the investigation never conclusively determined the time of death for the 9 hikers. And that gap, that profound gap in the official record, it just leaves the precise timeline of what happened suspended forever. We'll never know exactly when the fate of the Dyatlov group was sealed.